Hey everyone, Rutten here, and today I'm excited to share my thoughts on the 2024 iPad Air, specifically focusing on its capabilities for digital art creation. There are a lot of artists who swear by the iPad, so I want to take this opportunity to give you my perspective as someone who has owned a wide range of tablets. Let's dive in and see if this is worthy as a digital art workstation. This is not a sponsored video. I bought this iPad with my own money, and all opinions in this video are my own. Just for some background, I used to draw on the iPad a lot. This is the second generation iPad. I made loads of paintings on the iPad, but eventually I gravitated to more capable devices like the Surface Pro and the Wacom Mobile Studio Pro. I will compare the iPad to comparable devices throughout this review. It's been about a decade since I last painted on an iPad, and Apple has made some significant updates to the hardware, most notably support for pen pressure, tilt, and rotation. So I am curious to see how that will affect my opinion of the device. Now on to the review. First, let's talk a bit about configurations. There are several versions of the iPad. There's the basic iPad, which is what I was accustomed to working on. It's a bit too underpowered to really take it seriously for digital art. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there is the iPad Pro. This was more than I wanted to spend, but it is the most powerful iPad available, and I imagine it can handle digital art and anything else you can throw at it. There is also a mini version of the iPad, which is also lacking in power, and in my opinion would be too small to work on comfortably. Then there is the iPad Air, which is what I own. This is kind of the middle ground. It has an M2 chip, which should be enough power to handle digital art without being overkill. In this review, I will see how far I can push the iPad Air to see if it is even necessary to get the iPad Pro. There are also size and storage configurations for the iPads. I have the 11-inch model with 128 gigabytes of storage. I managed to find an open box iPad at Best Buy, which made it a bit cheaper, a little over $500. I also had to buy an Apple Pencil Pro, which was also open box, but was still around $100. Overall, I spent $700 after tax, but normally it would have been closer to $800. Now that you know what I'm working with, let's have a look at the features. The 11-inch iPad Air boasts a liquid Retina display with a resolution of 2360 by 1640 pixels. That's better than many of the low-end Wacom displays, which are only 1080p, but not as detailed as 4K on the higher-end Wacom displays. The image on the liquid Retina display is adequately sharp, and I can clearly see fine lines and stippling. As far as screen size, the iPad Air I have is 11 inches diagonally. That is comparable to a medium non-display tablet like the Wacom Intuos Pro. It's not super confining, but I prefer to have a larger display since I am accustomed to working on a Cintiq 27 QHD. The iPad Pro goes up to 13 inches, but that's still rather small. While I do appreciate the 16-inch screen on my Mobile Studio Pro, it definitely impacts the portability of the device. It's heavier and bulkier for sure. A good way to visualize the display size is to compare it to traditional paper or canvas. I am more comfortable working in a larger sketchbook that is at least 8.5 by 11. If you're used to smaller sketchbooks or canvases, then the 11-inch iPad might be just fine. In the context of portability, I can live with the small screen, but would I choose this size for everyday use? Definitely not. There's also the consideration of the screen surface. The iPad Air and Pro claim to have an anti-reflective coating, but it still looks glossy to me. The pen feels slippery on the surface, which makes slower strokes appear jittery. You can add stabilization in apps like Procreate, but that reduces the accuracy of your strokes and creates lag. In comparison, a Wacom display tablet has a matte screen that reduces glare and provides a pencil-like friction when using the pen. How the display feels against your palm is also important. The iPad screen sticks to my hand more, whereas the matte Wacom screens are smoother. This is important since you'll be dragging your palm, which affects your stroke stability and accuracy. You can purchase optional screen protectors for the iPad to add a paper-like surface, but that's an additional cost and a hassle to install. According to reviews, the screen protector wears down over time and they are not cheap to replace. In terms of refresh rate, the iPad Air does not support 120 Hz like the iPad Pro does. The Wacom Cintiq Pro 27 is the only Wacom offering that can match that refresh rate. If you tend to press down firmly when you draw, you might notice some distortion on the screen. This distortion can be experienced on some Wacom displays too, but there are also Wacom displays that don't have this characteristic. This distortion is definitely a distraction, but more importantly, you want to avoid pressing this hard because you could damage the display. That might be something to consider if you have a heavy hand like me. You'll want to calibrate your pen pressure so that you need not press as hard. The iPad Air and the iPad Pro utilize a P3 wide color space with True Tone. P3 is about 25% wider than the sRGB color you'll get with the cheaper iPads. You'll be able to see richer blues and greens, but it's not nearly as color accurate as the high Adobe RGB coverage you'll get from a high-end Wacom Cintiq or Mobile Studio Pro 16. In terms of display brightness, the iPad Air has 500 nits of brightness, whereas the Mobile Studio Pro has only 310. As someone who has done a fair amount of outdoor painting on tablets, the Mobile Studio Pro is very difficult to see, even on an overcast day. The iPad is much more visible in terms of brightness, but it also has a lot more glare. The iPad Pro has 1000 nits of brightness, so you can see it clearly even on the surface of the sun. Under the hood, the iPad Air is powered by Apple's M2 chip. For its size, this is a powerhouse of a processor. Digital art apps like Procreate are not particularly power-hungry since they are optimized for mobile devices. The M2 is probably overkill for such applications, but you'll have the peace of mind that even if you multitask and do other more processor-intensive things on your iPad, it won't slow to a crawl. My old iPad definitely hit a wall, even using Procreate, and it was not enjoyable to paint with relatively large brushes on relatively large canvases. So far, I've been able to paint with some pretty big brushes on decent-sized canvases without any severe lag. Even the watercolor simulation in Adobe Fresco renders quickly. I'm also impressed by how well Photoshop runs on the iPad. That's probably one of the few apps that can actually challenge the M2 processor. The M2 chip contains both a CPU and a GPU. The M2 GPU is much more capable than the Quadro P1000 found in the Mobile Studio Pro 16. The M2 supports video encoding and decoding for H.264 and HEVC, which could be a benefit if you edit videos of your artwork. According to benchmark tests, the M2 chip is twice as good as the i7 CPU and Quadro GPU in my Mobile Studio Pro 16 second generation. This is more of a trivial comparison since I can't really use the iPad for something like Premiere Pro or Photoshop to test how each device truly performs. The M2 would probably blow away the hardware in my Mobile Studio Pro, but it can't run hardware-intensive apps, so it's really just a lot of wasted potential. The M2 chip also has neural engine capabilities, which is supposed to be more powerful and energy efficient than using the CPU and GPU. But at this point, that doesn't really do much to serve digital artists, at least the ones who still make handmade art rather than just generating it with AI. Generative fill in Photoshop appears to run in the cloud, so it doesn't seem like the neural engine is even being used for that. Judging by the direction Adobe is going by making Photoshop on iOS more substantial, it's not unlikely that the software will eventually catch up to the hardware. Perhaps the neural engine could be used to speed up AI-based artwork upscaling. But until Procreate or other art apps are utilizing AI to boost performance, it's mostly a useless feature for artists. In terms of memory or RAM, the iPad Air has 8 GB compared to the Mobile Studio Pro, which has 16 GB and can be expanded to 32. 8 GB isn't much RAM. 16 is really the minimum you should have nowadays for creative work, but we'll have to see if that holds the M2 back or not when I start painting and working with a lot of layers. The iPad Pro comes with 16 GB of RAM, but only on the 1 and 2 TB storage models. An often overlooked aspect of display tablets is how much heat and noise they generate. The iPad hasn't made a peep so far. It's virtually silent. It's also not noticeably hot even when I use it for a long time. This is the advantage of Apple's processors. They are designed to be cool and quiet. The Mobile Studio Pro says the heck with being cool. Because it employs fan cooling, it's as loud as a jet engine at times and spews out heat like a dragon. Even some of Wacom's non-mobile displays can be quite loud, especially when you also have noise coming from the desktop or laptop they are connected to. If you're trying to draw and not disturb others, then the iPad is the way to go. As for storage, the iPad Air comes in 128GB, 256GB, 512GB, and 1TB storage options. If you're planning on creating a lot of digital art and storing it on your iPad, I recommend going for at least the 256GB option. I plan to store my completed artwork on my main desktop computer, so storage really isn't an issue. My Mobile Studio Pro has 512GB of storage, and I can swap out the SSD for a higher capacity. In my opinion, the greatest advancement in iPad capability has been the introduction of the Apple Pencil. This stylus allows you to utilize pen pressure, tilt, and rotation depending on the model you choose. Only certain pens are compatible with certain iPads, so you want to make sure you're getting the right one. Also important to note is that the pens have inconsistent features. For example, the USB-C version of the Apple Pencil does not support pen pressure, which is an essential feature for art. The Apple Pencil Pro has it all, so that's the one I am using. The Apple Pencil has over 4,000 pressure levels, which is sort of subpar considering many drawing tablets have over 8,000 levels. It's more comparable to the lower-end Wacom tablets. However, I am using a drawing tablet with only 2,000 pressure levels, and that's never held me back. I am excited to see barrel rotation offered on something other than the Wacom Art Pen. Rotating your brush dab is a powerful feature that is underrated. Just take a walk around an art store and look at all the flat brushes. You can get some really neat effects, from fan brushes to palette knives, simply by rotating your digital brush dabs. The Apple Pencil has low latency. That's how fast the screen reacts to your pen input. It feels very responsive, but you will see a slight delay between your pen tip and the cursor when you make fast, long strokes with large brushes. It might be slightly quicker than Wacom in terms of latency, but I wouldn't say it's a drastic difference. Neither pen technology has enough latency to bother me, so it's really a non-issue. You can also hover the Apple Pencil tip near the surface and preview where you will be drawing. Wacom displays have been able to do this for years, so it's good that the iPad now shares this feature. The Apple Pencil is very thin and minimalistic. It's quite similar to a traditional pencil, though rounded rather than hexagonal, and thicker than an average pencil. It's also much heavier than a pencil. A more faithful pencil emulation would be the Staedtler Norris Digital, which is a stylus you can use on Wacom EMR devices like the Wacom One 13. The Apple Pencil tip is conical and rather large compared to standard stylus nibs. Despite their robust appearance, the tips do wear down, and you can buy replacements which are sold in packs of 4 for $20. Wacom's nibs are around $1 to $3 each. I rarely change a Wacom nib, so that's never been an issue for me. If you use proper techniques, you can make your nibs last a long time. I haven't had the Apple Pencil for long enough to wear the nib, so I can't say much else about it. One really cool thing that sets the Apple Pencil Pro apart from other styluses is that it can be charged wirelessly. While that's a cool feature, it's also a relative disadvantage since Wacom's pens do not require a battery or charging. There's definitely the concern that the battery can degrade, shortening the lifespan of the Apple Pencil. To charge the Apple Pencil Pro, you can magnetically dock it to the side of the iPad. How cool is that? It has a pretty firm grip, so I doubt it would fall off easily. You'd have to knock it pretty hard to dislodge it, but it's also not terribly difficult to detach it when you want to use it. I really appreciate the way the pen stays with the tablet. It's much more elegant than the pen sleeves and cradles Wacom provides. The Apple Pencil Pro does not have any buttons on the side or an eraser on the back end. Most Wacom pens have those features, and they can be quite useful if not essential to many workflows. Instead, there is a squeeze area on the stylus that can essentially do what a button would do. It can invoke shortcuts, tools, and menus. Here you can see me use it in Procreate to bring up a quick menu with some of my custom brushes. You can also double tap an area of the stylus to perform certain commands. By eliminating buttons that stick out, the pen definitely feels more elegant than most drawing tablet pens, which all seem to emulate Wacom's traditional pens. The pen is one solid piece, which makes it feel quite durable. However, Wacom's pens are more modular, so you could replace a part rather than the whole stylus if there was any damage to it. While Wacom's buttons and eraser can be programmed to a wide range of shortcuts and commands, what you can control with the Apple Pencil shortcuts is limited. Wacom's newest Pro Pen 3 is about the same price as the Apple Pencil Pro, but it can be customized in a variety of ways. You can choose your preferred thickness, weight, grip, and button configuration. In my opinion, Wacom's older pens were much better. I think the new one is trying to be like the Apple Pencil, which is not good. The Apple Pencil feels very back-weighted. It's somewhat heavy at a little over 19 grams. Wacom's Pro Pen 2 feels noticeably lighter and more balanced at 15 grams, and the Pro Pen 3 is only 9 grams. For mobile painting, I like the Apple Pencil more because it can dock magnetically, but for everyday use, I prefer the traditional Wacom Pro Pen. Another feature that makes the Apple Pencil Pro stand out from other styluses is that it can provide haptic feedback. I'm not a fan of this myself, so I disable it on most devices, but it can make the pen vibrate when you squeeze or tap it to open a shortcut. The Apple Pencil has to be paired, which is a disadvantage in my book. I can use any number of Wacom pens on my devices, as long as they are compatible with that model. And Wacom pens don't need to be paired. The one positive thing about pairing the Apple Pencil Pro is that it can utilize Apple's Find My service. If I lose my pen, I can hopefully track it down on a map. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to play a sound to help locate it, and the map is too vague to be useful. It is possible that using a Bluetooth device tracker might help you sniff out the exact location, but I haven't tried it myself. If the Apple Pencil happens to lose all of its battery power before you find it, then it's untrackable at that point. Perhaps the most important comparison is how delicious each pen is to a dog. My dog seems to prefer the smell of the Apple Pencil, so that's something to consider if you have pets. I'll end this section about the Apple Pencil Pro with a PSA about third-party pencils for the iPad. I've noticed there are a lot of companies selling styluses for the iPad. Many of these pens do not support pressure sensitivity, and I can't speak for their quality, so don't just go out and buy one because it looks like the real thing. Do some research and read reviews, or just get a genuine Apple Pencil. In addition to drawing on the iPad, you might also want to do some handwriting. If not to write long-format text, then at least to label layers and canvases while you are painting. I can only assume that the neural engine is being used to recognize handwriting because the iPad does a pretty good job of deciphering my sloppy chicken scratch. I really like that I can just scribble what I want to type right in place rather than bringing up an on-screen keyboard or separate writing pad. In the past, one of the things that made me feel like the iPad was holding me back was the lack of cross-compatibility between iOS and Windows. This isn't as much of an issue now that Procreate can export to Photoshop PSD format, and many applications like Clip Studio Paint can save artwork to the cloud so you can work on it on all of your devices. Because the Mobile Studio Pro is a fully functional Windows computer, there is nothing interfering with me when I want to start a painting on the Mobile Studio Pro and finish it on my desktop. iPads support multi-touch, which can be very useful for digital art. On a desktop, it might not be essential, but on an iPad, it is. You can use touch to zoom, rotate, and pan, as well as for clicking on buttons. In Procreate, you can even use your finger to blend. Many of Wacom's tablets also support multi-touch. There are only a couple of differences I can identify. The first is that some Wacom tablets allow you to temporarily disable touch with a button or switch. This is important because touch can sometimes trigger accidentally when you're drawing, so it's useful to turn it off until you really need it. Apple claims up to 10 hours of battery life on a single charge. This will vary depending on your usage and screen brightness, but overall, the battery life is impressive. The Mobile Studio Pro 16 only offers up to 5.5 hours, and that's being quite generous. I think the iPad would be more reliable if you're painting outside the studio and you don't have access to an outlet. When painting outdoors on the Mobile Studio Pro 16, I rely on a portable battery bank. The only way to charge the Mobile Studio Pro is with AC power, so that requires more than the average USB power bank. This OmniCharge is a brick, but it doubles the time I can use the Mobile Studio Pro in the wild. Since the iPad Air charges through USB-C, you can use a much smaller power bank. So again, +1 for the iPad in terms of portability. The Mobile Studio Pro has this huge power cable that you have to lug around. The iPad just has this small optional adapter. You can charge it faster if you have a higher wattage adapter like the one that comes with a MacBook. The iPad Air is aptly named because it is really light. Would you believe it's barely over 1 pound? My Mobile Studio Pro is 4.7 pounds, which feels like it's made of gold in comparison. For mobile painters who hold the tablet the entire time, I can tell you from experience that the iPad is much easier to hold for long stretches. Your arm will get sore holding the Mobile Studio Pro. I can also use a strap like this to hold the iPad, whereas I have to either cradle the Mobile Studio Pro or put it on a travel easel. That brings me to my next consideration. What stands are available for the iPad Air? The answer is quite a lot, actually. There are all sorts of stands and arms that can hold the iPad. Because it's so light, I am just using this one that's meant for a Stream Deck. It's not very good because it can tip over though, so I rest it against something. I might eventually get a proper stand, but since this isn't my everyday drawing device, it's not a priority right now. It's more comfortable and ergonomic to keep your display angled like this. While it is well suited for lap drawing, hunching over the iPad for long stretches will not be good for your neck and back. A stand will also keep the iPad from getting all scratched up on the backside as it slides around your desk. It will slide because there is no grip on the back. Some Wacom displays like the Mobile Studio Pro come with a stand. Others, like this Wacom 113, require optional stands that must be purchased separately. Ideally, you'll want a stand that is rigid yet adjustable with grips on the bottom so it doesn't slide around easily. Those cheap folio ones aren't going to cut it. The audio and video components of the iPad are much better than that of the Mobile Studio Pro. The iPad Air M2 has dual 12-megapixel cameras, compared to the Mobile Studio Pro, which are only 5 and 8 megapixels. The iPad can record up to 4K video, but the Mobile Studio Pro tops out at 1080p. This might be important to you if you live stream your art process and you want a minimal setup. The USB-C port on the iPad Air can be used for more than just charging the device. You can connect peripherals like external storage, USB hubs, keyboards, and more. The port speed is USB 3 at 10 gigabits per second. You can even charge other devices like cameras and phones with the iPad. The USB-C port can also be used as a DisplayPort video connection to use the iPad either as a secondary display to extend your Mac or to mirror your iPad onto a secondary display like a monitor. The Mobile Studio Pro 16 has 3 USB-C ports and can either be used as a regular Cintiq when attached to a Windows desktop or laptop, or it can output video to extend or mirror onto a secondary display. As far as the build quality, the lightness of the iPad Air makes me a little nervous. The screen eventually cracked on my old iPad, and it was a much thicker device. In contrast, the Mobile Studio Pro feels like a rock. It would almost certainly be catastrophic if I dropped either device, but for something like sitting on the device or stepping on it, my gut feeling is that the Mobile Studio Pro would be more likely to survive. I have to remember that not everyone is as tech-savvy as I am. Ease of use for a wide range of abilities is also an important attribute of a digital art workstation. The iPad is very simplified in its physical design and user interface, and apps for iPad are drastically reduced in complexity to make them compatible with a mobile device and touch gestures. This makes the iPad easy to use whether you are a young child, pushing 100, or everything in between. You need not have a lot of computer experience, if any, to use it. The Mobile Studio Pro, on the other hand, requires a certain level of proficiency with Windows because it is far more complex than iOS. It's reasonable to believe that a child could easily launch the iPad and an art app and start painting without any assistance from an adult. They could even figure out where to find brushes and save artwork. I think those tasks would be more challenging on something like the Mobile Studio Pro since it behaves just like a desktop computer. In conclusion, the iPad Air is impressive for a tablet computer. I can definitely say my opinion of it has substantially improved. I still can't recommend the iPad over a desktop and Cintiq for professional use in a studio, but if you're more of a mobile or casual artist, then the higher-end iPads are definitely worth considering. While I won't be using mine as my primary digital art device, I am excited to use it for outdoor and mobile painting. I think overall it would be more convenient than lugging around the Mobile Studio Pro, and the display will be easier to see in direct sun. The exception being if I need to do professional work or handle other tasks like video editing. In that case, I would feel more comfortable with the Mobile Studio Pro 16 since it allows me to run everything I use on my desktop. Based on my experience, the iPad Air M2 is more than powerful enough for making digital art using something like Procreate. I didn't run into any slowdowns, so I have a feeling that choosing the iPad Pro would be a waste of money unless you're using it for something else. Since mobile apps are designed to be less intensive, I can't really see the logic behind making such a powerful tablet. It's disappointing that my preferred art applications are not supported on the iPad, such as Rebel and Krita. Performance-wise, these should have no issue running on an iPad Pro or even an Air, but maybe they're just waiting to be ported to the iPad. If you're going to spend $800 for the iPad Air M2 and the Apple Pencil Pro, you might want to at least take into account your other options. If you don't mind using Windows, you might be able to find a used Mobile Studio Pro 16 for around $850. You'd get a lot more versatility out of it, even if some of the hardware is slower. The Mobile Studio Pro might lag a bit on CPU-intensive applications, but at least you can run the full version of Photoshop, Rebel, Krita, or any other Windows app. You won't be held back by the limitations of iOS and Apple. If you already have a computer, then the best Wacom tablet in the $800 range would be the Wacom One 13 Touch, which is around $600 retail. It doesn't have as high of a resolution or as accurate color compared to the iPad Air, but if you're a hobbyist or beginner, then it might be a better way to go since you can leverage more capable desktop software and potentially better hardware. Plus, the screen is a bit larger with a better surface and less gloss. There is also the Cintiq 16, which is also around $600 if you can live without multi-touch. It would give you an even larger screen, and the Wacom Pro Pen 2 is far superior to the Apple Pencil Pro. You can even use other Wacom pens like the Art Pen if you need rotation. Thanks for watching. If you're going to purchase any of the devices I covered in this video, please use my affiliate links. I can earn commission at no additional cost to you, which helps me continue making reviews like this.